Let's move on now to the third email of the day. And the third email today comes to us from TP12, who writes, "Hey, John, greetings from Greece." Well, thank you so much, TP. I love Apollo 13, and I'm really excited for the new Damien Chazelle movie, First Man. Do you think it's a good idea for the studios to develop a based on a true story movie about a space mission which failed, causing astronauts' deaths, Space Shuttle Challenger or Columbia disasters? I think they're important stories that need to be told, and they'll make people think more about the risks of space programs. All right, thanks a lot for the question, TP12. And first of all, I completely agree with you. I cannot wait for First Man. I've been excited about this movie since the day they announced it, and I think a lot of you guys have been too. Killer cast, Claire Foy, Ryan Gosling, one of the hottest, if not the hottest director in Hollywood right now, with Damien Chazelle doing it. The buzz from the festival play that's been getting has been off the chart. A lot of people are already talking Oscar buzz for this film. The people who have seen it are already saying it could get a lot of Oscar buzz. I am one of those people, very excited to see it, and clearly you are too. It is, I know we've had a couple of these space programs like Apollo 13, now we're getting First Man, a lot of these movies that celebrate the triumph of mankind. And that's great. And those are important movies and important stories to tell. I completely love those movies. Like Apollo 13 is great. The idea of this one is great. And it is important to do these movies that celebrate the accomplishments of mankind. Should there be a movie, though, about some of the tragedies? Discovery, Columbia, things like that. Like, I was young, so some of you might be a little bit too young. Like, I was almost too young to remember, but I remember I was in grade school. I was a little kid, and it was on the TVs in the classrooms when the space shuttle taking off exploded. That was not something I think kids that were our age at the time could really wrap our heads around. It was like for a lot of kids, it was the first time we became awoken to the idea that, oh, things, even things run by people who work with mom and dad, even things made by adults, and these things can go bad. And bad things can happen, and accidents can happen with terrible. It was harsh. I even believe, if I remember the documentary correctly, I believe Mr. Rogers came out and did a special episode to talk to children about tragedy and things like that after the space shuttle disaster. And then, of course, there was another one with the shuttle returning as opposed to taking off. Should they do one of these movies? I think so. I would love to see a story that celebrates the life of those people that died going where no one had gone before, or at least very, very, very few people had gone before, you know? The courage and bravery to strap yourself onto a piece of metal with rockets to hurl you into outer space. I mean, and what their stories, their dreams and aspirations, and then embrace the tragedy of it as well. And then maybe look at some of the aftermath of the tragedy. Like maybe you do one of these movies that starts with the tragedy, and then the aftermath, looking back on the lives of the people. I don't know. There's lots of different ways you could do it. Now, it's not a studio's responsibility to tell important stories. That's not their responsibility. A studio's responsibility is to make movies that make money. That's their responsibility. They're not a public service. They're not there like, hey, you know, it's really important that people know the dangers of space travel. You, Paramount, make a movie about that. Well, I mean, they're only going to do if they can make money. But I believe you make one of those, whether it's Discovery or Challenger, you make one of those movies and you do it right. I think you've got a movie that can be important, that could be powerful, and be profitable. I think there would be a lot of people that would be intrigued to go in and watch one of those stories. I know I would. Hell, I know I'd be there first showing. I'd be there. Damn right I would be. Because everybody who was alive and everybody who was old enough, and I was barely old enough, but everybody who was alive and barely old enough, when that happened, remembers where they were when they heard that news. There are certain events that everybody remembers where they were when that happened. Like a lot of the older generation, they remember everybody who was alive at the time, they remember where they were when they found out John F. Kennedy was shot. Everybody remembers exactly where they were. For movie fans, I remember exactly to the square foot that I was standing in. I remember exactly where I was when it was announced that Heath Ledger had died. And I remember as this little kid, I was at St. Daniel's. That was my school. I was at St. Daniel's when we found out about the space shuttle. I'll never forget that. And I'll never forget getting in my mom's car. My mom had come to pick me up. And we talked briefly about it. And I don't know that my mom knew what to say. I don't remember much about the conversation. But movies about things like that, I think Hollywood has a track record of telling powerful stories surrounding tragedies. I think obviously there's been some botched things too, but if you go back through the history of Hollywood, there are some great examples of studios and filmmakers and storytellers who have told powerful stories revolving around tragedy. And I think this could very well be something like that. And maybe something like A First Man could put that more on the radar, if you will, for some studio. I know you'd have to handle it very delicately. You'd have to be very careful. You'd have to be very methodical in writing that script and getting the right people involved. But I think you do a movie about either Challenger or Discovery, you do either one of those right, you could have a landmark kind of a film. I honestly think you could have a landmark kind of a film. And I just know I would certainly be on board for it, and I'd be there. Hell yeah, I'd be there. All right, let's move on now to the final email today.